information, because if the physician and the patient really can't move forward without this, then I would not want to hang up without at least having a plan for getting this information. So I wish I could combine some of these. I would express to them how hectic the job can be, but then also want to ask and make sure we can get the information. There's some of these that are pretty similar to. I think number 1, I'm going to ask if there's an alternative or easier way, just because maybe they have another idea, or we could have some way to share the information maybe a little bit later on, maybe when it's not quite as busy, but as long as we have a plan to do that. So first I'd just inquire and see if there is an easier way, and then if not, I just go forward. And I guess second, I would apologize for the inconvenience and then try and convince them of the urgency of the situation, just so they understand, which leaves number 3 is telling them patient care is a top priority, which is very similar, I think, to the one that I put as number 2. I don't quite see the differences between those. Just expressing that it won't take very long, because I guess 2 and 3 are very similar in my mind. One of your closest relatives has been trying desperately to conceive a child over the past few years with no success. During lunch one day, they describe their frustrations and begin to become visibly upset. Your relative talks about how they feel responsible for the issue and feel like so much of it is out of their control. Provide comfort to your relative and ask further questions about their feelings. Discuss if they've considered options such as fertility clinics, surrogacy, or adoption. Offer to arrange a time to speak with them again to follow up if things have improved. Comfort them by talking about how difficult it is to raise children and how it limits lifestyle. Describe your own struggles with becoming pregnant or stories of other couples. I'm not going to comfort them by talking about how difficult it is to raise children, because clearly they want children, so you're not going to convince them otherwise. I really don't think that would make them feel better and just make it seem like you don't understand what's going on. So if I had my own struggles, I think that'd be a really good place to start. I'm not going to discuss if they've considered other options, because clearly this is really important to them, and I think it might seem like you're kind of blowing off their concern if you bring up the option of other things like fertility clinics. Like, I'm sure they probably thought about that, and it's not their number 1 option, clearly. It'd be good to provide comfort to them. I'm going to put number 3 as offering to arrange a time to speak with them again to follow up. That seems like really formal for a relative. You can follow up with them whenever you want. It's not like you're a patient in a physician relationship. So at least providing comfort and then describing own struggles. I think first I'd provide comfort to them. That's like the number 1 thing that they would need in my mind. And then if they still don't really quite seem comforted by that, or if they don't want to ask further, if they don't want to answer any further questions, if I had my own struggles, that's what I would do second. So I'm going to put that as number 2.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is ask you some specific questions about several of the items. What you'll notice is the questions get relatively repetitive. So the best way to approach this is to try to be concise in your answers. It helps to avoid just duplicate comments. Okay, so for this question here, how did you decide how to rank the options?
I'm going to look at it again real quick.
That's no problem.
So just explaining a little more in depth how I went about ranking them.
Yep.
So for this one is where the friend had like a pill to help them study. Right off the bat when I was reading it, I was like, oh, they're probably going to like offer if I want one. And I knew right away that I would not want to take that. And so when I read that option, I knew, okay, that one's number 5. Okay. The rest of them were a little more close in proximity to what I wanted to do. So it was a little bit harder to rank those. But I put number 1 as acknowledging their situation and discussing the challenges that they're facing, because I thought that option compared to the other ones would allow for a more like open discussion compared to some of the other ones. And so acknowledging their situation, discussing like any problems that they're facing, I think would be kind of like a gateway to making more progress. Like it'd be a more productive conversation. Okay. But then I also like the idea of kind of offering to help them find alternatives. That sounds like something that I personally would do. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of one where I wish I could have combined it a little bit. It was like a very close second. Okay. Just because, again, like looking for productive ways to help them, I would want to do as much as I could personally to help them find alternative ways to address the problems that they're going through. Then for numbers 3 and 4, I mean, asking them if it's necessary to take the medication. I just didn't really like how this one was worded as much. It kind of sounds like if I did that, it would be kind of condescending. Like, oh, do you really think that's a good idea? Like, you don't want to come off that way to a friend when you're trying to get them to open up to you about problems. Okay. So I put that as number 3. And then number 4 seemed to just kind of stop the conversation, which was tell your friend no, that you don't need it to study, which is true, but I think just closing with that really just like puts a stop to any communication. Was there anything that made this difficult for you? Yes, like I said, there were some that were pretty similar, I think, like acknowledging the situation, but also offering to help. Like, I wish I could have combined those two, and so deciding between number 1 and number 2 were a little bit hard for me, but I think that's kind of what these tests get at, is kind of having to fine-tune the details of the choices. Other than that, it was pretty easy to kind of chunk them into what I would do and what I definitely wouldn't do. Okay. What experiences, if any, did this question make you think of when you answered it? I haven't had personal experiences with friends studying in this way, but I've heard a lot of stories like from undergrad and everything, and I've had friends who do take medications prescription-wise and who do distribute them to others, and so I've kind of thought about that. And back in undergrad, I felt like I would be a little judgmental about people in that way, and so it's kind of opened my eyes to other ways I could experience this personally in the future if it comes up again. Like, I was thinking how maybe I should reach out to them and offer more help and like express concern for like what the underlying problem is, instead of judging them for like distributing their medication or whatnot, like as a pharmacy student. Yeah. Like, I'm gonna have the holier than thou attitude, but it's probably not gonna help anybody. What if the setting the question was different, that this was a healthcare context and it was a patient asking to take a prescription that was not for them? How does that impact your... You mean if I were like if I were a pharmacist and a patient asked me about taking a medication? Like, say they're not prescribed. Okay, say like, oh, a friend offered me this. Do you think I could take it? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. As a pharmacist and like just as a professional in general, I would never recommend someone to take a medication that's not prescribed for them. I would then want to have a more open discussion with them about what issues they're experiencing, and I would probably refer them to a physician as well, just because we're not trained to diagnose ADHD or anything of that sort. But if I kind of like have some warning signs, I have friends who deal with that issue as well, and if they really do have warning signs about not being able to concentrate, it's affecting their work, it's affecting their life, I would definitely refer them to get a prescription if they really do think that that's something that they need. But if there are other strategies like study strategies or like sleep hygiene strategies I can recommend first, then I would just recommend that as like a professional to a patient. Okay. But I would not have them be taking their friend's medication under any means, I don't think. Okay. What knowledge or ability do you think this question is testing? That's a good question. You said what knowledge or ability? Yeah, what do you think this question is asking you to do? Let's see. I think this question... I'm going to think about that for a moment. If that's fine. I think this question is kind of getting at what to do when you're kind of being pulled in two different ways, like professionally and personally. Okay. So to me, I guess, you have a friend who's doing something that like morally might not seem okay to you, and if they were a stranger, it'd be easy to say, oh, you shouldn't do this. Like, you should really look into other ways. But if they're clearly, your friend is struggling and you're seeing this and they're doing something that might not be the best option, I think it's like really easy to look past the moral character of whatever decision they're making if there's someone who's close to you. So I think it's kind of parsing down between what's a good thing to do professionally and like maybe morally versus personally. You don't want to like ruin a relationship with a friend over this, and so how do you kind of navigate that? Okay, so I'll take that one back. Okay, so for this question, how did you decide how to rank these options? Oh, this one was hard for me too. This one was another one where number 5 jumped out to me really quickly, so I'll start with that. Okay. Requesting that he be transferred to a different pharmacist, that is really going to get you nowhere. It might just make another pharmacist upset with you, and the patient, like switching around providers is not a good idea for the patient either, and it just makes you seem kind of lazy. And you also want to be able to help people. Like, we're going into pharmacy because we want to help people, and so when a problem comes up, you can't just like pass the buck to somebody else. So that was number 5 for sure. And then the other ones I found to be really difficult when I was discussing the question earlier about I didn't know if I wanted to ask the patient right away because I want to have that patient-provider relationship and I want to keep that route open and I don't want to go behind their back. But if you already suspect they're not being truthful with recording their numbers, I really don't know how true